On December 14th, 2012, 20 children were shot dead, along with 6 adults, at their school in Newtown, Massachusetts. Maureen Dowd wrote a column then at the New York Times, and she wanted to answer a question that everyone was asking, but she knew she wasn't qualified to answer the question. She knew she didn't know what to say. So she turned her column over to a Catholic priest that she and her family had been friends with for a long time. She wanted him to answer the question, why God? Why, God, did you allow this tragedy to happen? Well, we ask that question when big tragedies occur, like kids are killed while they're at school, or pandemics wreak havoc throughout the world. But we could ask that question every single day. Why, God, does this child wait for an organ donor? Why, God, did a drunk driver kill that family? Why, God, did a tornado wipe out that town? Why, God, do all kinds of bad things happen in our world? The reality is that question could be asked every day because we live in a broken and fallen world where suffering is commonplace. It's not the exception. If anything, it's more like the rule. We have to figure out how to live a life of meaning and purpose in a world that experiences suffering. Every world religion, every worldview has to be able to handle the question of suffering, or else it loses all credibility. In his book, Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering, Tim Keller lays out some perspectives that different religions offer on suffering. For example, and I know this is a bit overly simplified, but I think it's true and still gets to the point. Buddhism says that suffering is illusory. It's not real. The way to combat suffering is to eliminate your desires. If you don't want things, then you can't suffer when you don't have them. The secular worldview says that this world is all that there is. Suffering is a complete interruption to the good life. And many secularists are committed to fight against all forms of suffering. They do it with great urgency. This world, after all, is the only world that they believe is real. It's the only world there is. Pure atheists, like Richard Dawkins and some of the other new atheists, well, they believe that suffering is a product of random chance. Dawkins is very famous for saying that this world, this cold material world, well, there's no purpose in it, no hope, nothing really called suffering. It's just kind of bad luck, and there's nothing you can really do about it. Hinduism and other Eastern religions believe in karma. What goes around comes around. You get what you deserved. And those religions teach that suffering is a product of bad decisions made in a previous life, that you will be reincarnated and deal with the consequences of your past life. There's a lot of confusion about suffering. How are we going to live in this world? How are we going to interpret the bad things that happen? What does suffering mean to us? The world is confused about it. Does Christianity offer any hope, any perspective? On top of our confusion, there is this deep desire in all of us to avoid suffering. The reality is that we're not very good at handling it. Paul Brand was a Christian missionary doctor who worked in India for a very long time. And when he returned to the United States, he said something that I think is insightful. He said this: "In the United States, I encountered a society that seeks to avoid pain at all costs. Patients lived at a greater comfort level than any I had previously treated, but they seemed far less equipped to handle suffering and far more traumatized by it." Well, that sounds like us, doesn't it? We're confused. We don't know how to handle suffering. We're traumatized by it. We're scared to death of it. Does the Bible offer any hope or perspective? In John chapter 9, there's a story about a man born blind. And his disability, again, which he's had since birth, sparked a conversation between Jesus and his disciples. I think that we can learn a lot from that conversation. And maybe you would want to pick up your Bible sometime today and read John chapter 9. Read that story because we're going to be in it for the next few days. Let me say this, though, as we wrap up our time together for now. Let me say this. Christianity offers real resources to you, to all those who follow Jesus, to handle suffering. It offers a perspective on suffering. It says that you are not alone in your suffering. See, that's what the incarnation is about, what we celebrate at Christmas, that God took on human flesh in Jesus, that Jesus entered into our world, our broken, fallen, yes, our suffering world, and that Jesus suffered with us. Jesus took suffering upon him. Jesus defeated suffering. Jesus offers to heal us in our suffering. Jesus promises us a world in which there will be no suffering. And until that day, he promises to walk with us as we deal with real life suffering. Pick up chapter 9 and read John. I think you'll benefit from our conversations. I'll be back here tomorrow, and we'll start at the beginning of John 9.